Good evening, everyone, and thank you for attending the Village of Broadview Water Affordability Analysis. This is a partnership with the Metropolitan Planning Council and Elevate. We've worked with them probably for the last 5 or 6 months, putting this plan together on how we look at water rates and how we look at our water infrastructure and what would be best for the Village of Broadview. So in all transparency, we just wanted to be transparent with our residents and our business stakeholders on what came out of this analysis. I can literally say that I'm quite pleased with the outcome of it, because sometimes when you have a third party doing work on your behalf, you don't know what the outcome is going to be. And so if you recall, back in maybe 4 or 5 years, we did water rate increase for 5 years, over a 5-year period of time. And so now as we tap into looking at water rates and what that looked like for us in the future in 2024, we're going to have to revisit that. So this was the perfect time for us to start having these conversations, to be upfront with you, the residents, and our water payers on what that looks like for the Village of Broadview. And I'm going to turn it over to Justin, Jordan, and Alec to go over the analysis of what they came out with and what was the outcome. But one sticking point that was so significant to me is when we started the water rate conversation, and we wanted to give some flexibility to our large water users because they pay a lot of money in water bills, sometimes over $100,000 a month. And we complaining about a $43 water bill. I know I do sometimes because I'm in the house by myself. And so when we looked at this analysis and we was given, like, depending on the threshold of the gallons of usage they're using, we would give a 5% discount or a 10% discount. As we move forward, we know in the Village of Broadview we can no longer do that. So we have to be upfront, we have to be transparent, and we have to be accountable for the decisions that we have to make that's best for everyone, not just the municipality or the board or the mayor, but it's what's best for the Village of Broadview and how we move forward and how we look at large water projects. Like, we know in the future that we are mandated by the state of Illinois to change our service lines. And so where do that money come from so that it's not taxing on the end user? So we have to come up with solutions. We have to get creative on how we look at everybody's interest in this. So I'm excited about the plan. Like I said, I learned some things out of it, but as we move forward, you learn, you grow, you move forward, and you keep growing. So we're going in the right direction with a plan like this, and as we look at our comprehensive plan, we're going in the right direction. So it's about accountability, transparency, honesty, and being responsible to the taxpayers. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Justin with Elevate. Thank you.
Mayor Thompson, I wonder, I have these printouts. It's probably enough for just the people that are here. So thanks, Mayor, for that introduction. My name's Justin Keller. I'm with Elevate, and I'm joined by my colleagues. First, Jordan, also with Elevate, and then Alec with the Metropolitan Planning Council. As the mayor said, we've been doing this water affordability analysis for the past 5 or 6 months, and we're really excited here at the end of the project to share the results of what we found. If you're looking at the slides, you can go to the second page, which has the agenda. I want to give some background for what brought us to this point in this project and why we're working with the Village of Broadview. And then we're going to go into an overview of the project. So explanation of the data analysis, the stakeholder engagement that we did, and then some of the key findings and recommendations based on that. And then I think if we've got enough time at the end, we'd like to have a little discussion to answer any questions that you have about this project. So on the next slide, it says water affordability. This is just some background, again, to give the backstory of what brought us to this project. And I want to go over some key terms as well as the timeline for our work on this. So then on the next page, it says key terms. So I want to define water affordability for you. First one is that water affordability is a function of the interaction between cost of service and income. So that income part is really important. The same water rate or the same water bill could be very affordable for one household, but a really heavy burden on other households. So it's an interaction between these two things. And whatever that percent of the income is, we refer to as the water bill burden. And that burden could be a low burden or it could be a high burden, again, based on how much income that household has. But it's often the same rate is very different based on who's being asked to pay it. So I just want to say that up front. So again, water bill burden is the percentage of the income that goes towards paying the water bills. And there's no definition on what is a low burden or a high burden. There are many definitions rather, but there's no agreed upon definition of what is low versus a high burden. One common method that's often cited is from the United States Environmental Protection Agency. They say that if less than 2.5% of your water bill, less than 2.5% of your monthly income goes towards your water bill, then that's acceptable. For combined water and sewer, then they bump that to 4.5%. So in other words, a high burden is if more than 4.5% of your monthly income is going towards your combined water and sewer bill. Very complicated. And again, this is not even a widely agreed upon methodology. Some people say 4.5% is a huge burden. That's not acceptable if it's below that. But just using this as a point of comparison on the next slide, we look at the EPA methodology and evaluate just the median income for the northeastern Illinois region. And here, this map is showing the municipalities in red. We see Chicago, I think that's Maywood, some towns in South Cook County, where some residents are have a high water burden based solely on the median income, the middle income of that municipality. We feel like just looking at the middle income is kind of masking the extent of potential water affordability challenges. So instead of only looking at the median, we broke it up into quintiles. So the 20% in the middle, the next 20% down, the lowest 20%, and the same in the other direction. And on the next slide, or the next page for you, you can see the difference between just looking at median income versus looking at the quintiles. And here we're looking at the lowest 20% of earners. The bottom 20% of income earners, how much they would be paying for 4.5% of their income. And we see that water burden is potentially spread throughout the entire region of northeastern Illinois. So again, this 4.5% is not commonly accepted. People argue over it, but just using it as a point of comparison, we see that there potentially are water affordability challenges all throughout the region. And based on this, our two organizations produced this report on the next page called Water Affordability in Northeastern Illinois. So we published these findings and made a recommendation that municipalities pay more attention to this. Potentially, if you're only looking at the median income, then there are some people that are really struggling to afford their water bill without you necessarily knowing it. So we produced that report. After that, we partnered with the cities of Chicago and Evanston to look at their water billing data. And then last year and until now, we've been working with Broadview and Harvey to look at data and make recommendations for these two municipalities. And on the next slide, you can see the scope of work of what we did. We did an analysis of water billing data, as well as talked with some stakeholders, which included residents and some elected officials and business owners, to understand water affordability, billing, customer service, a range of things that impact water affordability in Broadview. And then we proposed recommendations based on what we found. I want to state that this was pro bono technical assistance, so there was no cost to the municipality. This was helpful for us to get a better understanding, following up on the report that we did, and we hope that the findings are going to be beneficial for Broadview and the residents and businesses that are here. So that's the scope, and without further ado, I'll turn it over to my colleague Alec, who will run over the data analysis. Alec.
Hi, my name is Alec. I'm the research manager at the Metropolitan Planning Council, and I'm going to walk through the data analysis component of this. So on slide number 10, which at the top will say data analysis overview, I just kind of wanted to touch on at a high level what was done. And so this analysis really centered around trying to understand the water billing and debt trends present in the village. So this looked at 62,000 bills from roughly 2,400 water accounts in the village between July 2020 and August 2022. I want to emphasize that these were all residential accounts. This analysis did not look at businesses, government, commercial, industrial users. This just focused on residential water customers in the village. 2,400 accounts doesn't represent all of the water accounts in the village. This was just accounts that had activity for that whole 2 years. So we wanted to look for residents who were anchored in their homes, not, 2 months of billing activity and then they left. So these are people who were consistently here for that 2-year period. The analysis looked at 3 different things: the cost of water and sewer service, carried balances, so people who have paid bills late, the balances they're carrying from month to month, and then point-in-time snapshots of the debt. So that means just the debt, where it stood in the month of July in 2020, 21, and 22. So not over time, just in that moment, where did things stand? On the next slide, slide 11, we have a couple key takeaways, which I'll get into a little bit more, and then also we'll feed into the Jordan's discussion and the recommendations at the end. So the first point I wanted to make was that 88% of registered accounts in the village were residential. So that means of people who have a water account in the Village of Broadview, by and large, those are residential customers. However, they do not consume the most water. Commercial and industrial users consume the most water. The average monthly cost of water and sewer service in Broadview, with no late penalties, no garbage fees, nothing else, just water and sewer costs, the average monthly bill is $45.92. Most accounts remain current on their monthly bills. Roughly 2/3 of residents had a late payment less than twice a year. So most residents are on a monthly basis staying current on their water bills. The last point, which we'll discuss at the end, is there's a small cohort of accounts that hold the majority of the outstanding water debt to the village. So there's a small number of accounts with a large amount of debt that makes up most of the outstanding debt to the Village of Broadview. On the next slide, which is slide 12, at the upper left, it will say cost of water and sewer service. You will see 2 charts. The chart on the left shows how much people consumed, so that water consumption by account type breaks down consumption by government, residential, commercial, industrial. The one on the right shows of the water that was billed, how much each of those user groups paid for the water. So reflecting Mayor Thompson's earlier point on the tiered rates for businesses versus residential, there was 88% of the customers, residential, consume roughly 39% of the water, but they pay for 42% of it based on the discounts that help to encourage businesses to locate in the village. So you see a slight shift of sort of that cost of water from commercial and industrial to residential users based on that tiered rate system meant to incentivize business activity. On the next slide, slide number 13, which at the top again will say cost of water and sewer services, you'll again see 2 graphs. I'm sorry for all of the graphs, but as a researcher, we love a chart. The top chart is just the cost of water and sewer service. The bottom chart includes water, sewer, and relevant penalties, late fees, what have you. And so the main point here is that when you look at just the cost of water, no late charges, anything else, the average bill is $45.92 on a monthly basis, with 78% of water bills in the village being under $60. However, when you account for late charges, you see that the average bill for accounts that do have late charges, you see the average bill bumps up to $50.26 a month, and only 73% of customers have a water bill under $60. I want to point to, and this may be a little tricky to see, but on these charts at the high end, you have the number of bills above $100, and you have the number of bills between $80 and $100. When you begin to include those late charges, you see more water bills fall into those categories. So as we reflect on late charges, you see more people's bills being pushed into higher costs. On the next slide, slide 14, upper left, we'll say past due balances. This looks at the number of customers who have past due balances, bills that have been yet to be paid. So during the 2 years between July 2020 and August 2022, on average, 350 customers carried a balance on a monthly basis. So roughly 1 in 8 customers was carrying a balance every month on average. I want to emphasize 2/3 of overall customers carried a balance less than twice a year. So again, you see a significant chunk of Broadview residents are paying their bills on time. Once in a while, we may miss a payment, happens to all of us. But by and large, people are consistently paying on time. On the opposite end of the spectrum, you see that there's a small number of accounts that are paying often late. 1 in 7 customers carried a balance for at least 40% of that 2-year period. So a small number of accounts are consistently paying their bills not when they are due. On the next slide, slide 15, you see, and this sort of will lead into that small number of accounts holding a large amount of debt. This chart shows the average balance carried by accounts that are past due. So for accounts that were past due in July 2020, the average balance was $172. However, by July 2022, the average balance for past due accounts was $253. This again stems from a smaller cohort of customers carrying a large amount of debt. This phenomenon is shown on slide 16, which at the top says Debt Snapshots. And I'm going to walk us through sort of this table and what it means. Each row is a different year indicated by that leftmost column. The second column, which says percent residential with no debt, that refers to, in July of that year, what percent of residential accounts held no debt whatsoever. So in 2020, 88% of water accounts in Broadview had no past due balances. It slipped a little to 2021, and then we saw another slightly larger decrease in 2022. I want to emphasize that this was just sort of point in time. We looked at that month, and so that isn't necessarily indicative of some long-term great decline. That was just where the figure was, but we do note that there were slightly more customers holding debt. That second column, and this is the most confusing thing I will try to explain to you, I'll try to make it clear. This refers to customers with debt. So for 2020, 88% of customers, no debt. That 59% refers to the 12% of customers that did have debt. So it's a slice of that small slice. So ultimately that reflects about 7% of all water customers had less than $100 in debt. Where we, I think, are really interested in terms of our recommendations and targeting, some strategies to work with customers to get current, are this small number of customers holding a large amount of debt. So in 2020, 20 customers who had greater than $500 in past due balances held 68% of all of the outstanding water and sewer debt to the city. So of $95,000 in outstanding water and sewer debt to the city in July 2020, just 20 residential accounts held 68% of that. So that is a small number of accounts, less than 1% of the total customer base, holding the majority of the outstanding debt. Over time, we see this grow. So from 2020, there was $95,000 in outstanding debt. In 2022, that had grown to $144,000. So the pie of debt grew bigger. We also see that the number of accounts with high levels of debt also grew, and their share of the debt grew. So accounts that had greater than $500 in outstanding debt, by 2022, that was 51 accounts. They held 78% of the outstanding debt. So I like to think of it as between 2020 and 2022, the pie of debt got bigger, and the piece of pie that those high debt accounts also got bigger. So you see those two phenomena sort of occurring side by side. You'll see these things pulled into the recommendations, and I want to pass it over to my colleague Jordan, who's going to talk about stakeholder engagement and sort of the stakeholder perspective on some of these trends.
Thanks, Alec. My name is Jordan Nash. I'm with Elevate. I'm project manager for the research and innovation team, and I led the stakeholder engagement portion of this project. To build on that quantitative analysis, Elevate conducted several interviews with the following stakeholder groups: residents, small business owners, elected officials, and the staff at the Village of Broadview. Yeah, I'm trying to see if, can you guys hear me? Okay, good. So to include in the interviews, we gathered experiential data and also identified potential issues and opportunities related to water affordability. The interviews covered topics such as water billing, data management, assistance programs, and customer service. The next several slides are going to break down some of our key findings from each group that we interviewed with. To start with the residents, overall residential customers were highly satisfied with the cost of water, as well as the leadership and transparency from the water department and elected officials. Customers that I spoke with reported that installation of water meters have been helpful for tracking water consumption and consumption between billing cycles. Now, however, some individuals believe that the installation of these smart meters will cause their water bills to go up. So there was a little bit of a hesitancy to have that installation take place. And lastly, some of the senior citizens expressed the need for more support and assistance. And speaking with a specific resident who may not qualify for assistance programs such as CETA, their immigration status had come into play when applying for some of those assistance programs. Now, another component that we factored in was the small business owners who work in the village. And overall, their feedback of the water in the village is they believe it's reasonably priced and suitable for their needs. A respondent did express that if they had known the water bill was this high, or the water rate would increase as much, that they may not have located their business in the village. Another said that the water was not suitable for their needs and requires expensive additional treatment, but this was just specific to the business that they conducted. On the next page, we talked with several municipal officials and staff, and from their perspective, the installation of the smart meters allowed them to track water data and consumption better and provide better responses to customers when bills and water usage were spiking. To give a little bit more detail, this kind of information would help identify leaks early on, opposed to waiting until the water bill arrives at a high point. And overall data management improvement was also a factor for staff to run reports that would provide that information to customers and measure the consumption and costs, and to understand trends for when presenting to a residential customer and business owner. One concern that was known to the village staff members and municipal officials is that the Chicago water rates are increasing, and the village's elected officials are working with customers to implement incremental rate increases so that water bills do not cause an excessive burden. To finish up the municipal officials and staff findings, water is viewed in this village as a very valuable resource. It is an asset that can attract new residents and commercial ventures. Public education is a high priority on their list for ways to get more customers involved and have more engagement with staff and department heads for just understanding what's going on in the water system and what rates to pay for correctly. And then the village is prioritizing in projects that can address multiple issues simultaneously at the same time to take advantage of efficiencies such as replacing water mains, replacing sewer laterals, and that could be taking place with road construction. So that is all I have to say about the stakeholder engagement, and I'm going to pass it back to Justin for key findings and recommendations.
All right, so on the next slide, which is slide 24, or rather just straight to page 25, based on this analysis that we did, a couple of things jumped out to us that we wanted to highlight and make recommendations on. Slide 25 has the four main things, but I'm going to walk through each one of these one by one. So let's jump right into the first one on slide 26. Key finding one was based on what we heard. Customers are generally satisfied with Village Water and their interactions with the administration, and we wholeheartedly agree with that. We saw a group of really committed and devoted public servants being very responsive to village concerns and trying to address issues quickly. So keep on doing the good work on that, as well as identifying potential opportunities where some people who may need assistance, just targeting additional assistance to them. On page 27, I'm going to walk through again the table that Alec already talked about with key finding 2, which is that customers generally carry low amounts of water debt, but a small cohort of consistently past due accounts hold a significant amount of debt. Alec just explained this, but I'll do it one more time. There are 3 sets of dashed boxes. So the first one in black shows that at each of the 3 point-in-time snapshots, greater than 80% of residential customers had no debt. But when we look at residential accounts that did have debt in the green box, a lot of them had less than $100 in debt, so 59%, 65%, and 58%. We don't want to make a judgment of whether less than $100 in debt is reasonable or not, but just saying based on that, as well as the period of time that people are past due, most people had relatively low amount of debt and paid it off within a month or 2 months. So the main target should be the orange hashed box, where it talks about the very small number of customers who are carrying the majority of past due balances for the village. So in the 2022 snapshot, for example, knowing that this is right in the heart of the pandemic, that it was only 51 accounts that had 78% of the high debt for 51 accounts held 78% of the debt for the village. So our analysis didn't identify who those customers are or what their circumstances are, but certainly the village can identify those customers, reach out directly, and find out what types of assistance they could be connected with, or assistance that would help them to bring their accounts current and stay current. That's not to say that the ones that are less than $100 in debt don't need any attention. We make other recommendations in the report for how to make sure that water is universally accessible and affordable to all customers. On the next page, key finding number 3, because of the tiered rate structure, a smaller group of customers are paying less despite their comparatively larger impact on the system. In the bottom right of this page, it shows the water rates for the village, and there are 3 tiers based on usage. So 0 to 25,000 gallons is tier 1, but the tier 2 and tier 3 users get a 5% or 10% discount for a higher volume of usage. If you look at the 2 pie charts, again, these are the same ones that Alec already talked about, looking just at the residential, so the dark blue, residential customers accounted for 39.1% of consumption of water, but were billed for 42.3% in the other pie chart. Our analysis just looked at this data. We didn't do the cost of service, so I can't say how much it costs to provide water to these 2 groups of customers. And if you imagine if there's a single industrial user, they have a very large diameter pipe, and maybe it's a low fixed cost to provide that service compared to residential customers where there's this network of smaller pipes that need to be maintained. This is just something that jumped out from the data, that there's this disparity between usage and how much the 2 groups are being billed. But again, this would require a different set of analysis to determine what a portion of the charges should go to each customer class. Then the last finding on the next page, key finding 4, is that water rates do not reflect the cost of purchasing water from the city of Chicago. Broadview purchases Lake Michigan water from the city of Chicago. It's treated in the water purification plants in Chicago, comes to the Broadview Westchester Joint Water Agency, and then actually Broadview is purchasing from that joint water agency. But it's all based on the rates that Chicago is charging, and I have this table here of Chicago's water rates. Starting in 2008, Chicago started increasing their rates to make up for years of not charging enough to maintain their own system. So you can see in 2008 and 2009, they increased it by, very small here, 15% in both of those years. In 2010, they increased by 14%, and so on until 2016, where Chicago passed an ordinance that they would raise their rates for residents of the city of Chicago and all of their customers throughout the region based on the consumer price index. So based on the previous year's rate of inflation, they increased their water rates by that percent. The Broadview Westchester Joint Water Agency also has a policy to pass these charges on, and the Village of Broadview has chosen to raise rates over time so that it's not just a sudden shock to the residents and other customers of the village. That might be the right decision. We certainly were impressed by the community engagement behind that, of trying to explain the reason for the rate increases and determine a rate increase that wouldn't be a heavy burden. But the truth is that Chicago's rates are going to continue going up, and if Broadview is eating the cost of those increases and then raising the residents' and customers' rates over time, it could get to the point where you don't have the adequate funds for timely system maintenance and the repairs, and then if there are emergency repairs, those tend to be more costly. So we just want to caution that when the time comes for the next rate setting process and determining the priorities, to consider the timeliness of the rate increases to make sure that the system can be maintained and operating effectively. Beyond these 4 recommendations, we also included on the next page just some foundational recommendations for all municipalities. This is based on a nationwide analysis by the Illinois-Indiana Sea Grant of water affordability programs and policies. They recommended 5 foundational recommendations, and we tacked on the 6. But for example, promoting water conservation, such as a lawn watering ordinance during periods of drought or not watering during the middle of the day, can help to relieve pressure on the water system. Other things like number 5, targeting the hard to reach. Hard to reach refers to people that reside in apartments or condominiums who don't receive the bill directly from the village, and therefore it's harder to know what challenges they might be having in affording their bill, and targeting assistance that would meet those needs. And then the last one is developing a water workforce. We're in a once-in-a-generation moment where the federal government is sending a lot of funds to municipalities throughout the country to address some of these longstanding infrastructure needs like roads and water infrastructure. And it's important to think about how that water can help to improve the infrastructure, but also have those benefits go out to the community so that the people that are doing the work are also the people that live in the community, and getting upskilled or getting transferable skills that can lead to future employment for residents here. And that's the last slide. I think we have plenty of time to answer any questions that folks have. But we really want to say thank you so much to the village for this opportunity to look into this data. It was really insightful for us, and I hope impactful for the village as well. But again, thank you very much, and happy to answer any questions. Yes?
In other communities in the Midwest, do they go for the water conservation and try to work on that as a process in their villages and towns? Because I know that works in California. I used to be out there a lot and have relatives there. But I was wondering, has that taken place here?
I'll repeat the question for the people that might be watching online or for the recording. The question was about water conservation efforts for other communities around the Midwest, if others are also implementing these things. It's a recommended best practice, but not all municipalities are doing that. Some have. Are you talking about like the lawn watering ordinance to not use water?
What has been their success with it, to your knowledge?
I don't know that answer, sorry. To the amount of water saved, I think that a lot of people view our region as having a limitless amount of water because we take water from Lake Michigan, and we have an abundance. And even in recent years, the lake was at record high levels that it was causing challenges. But the water that we conserve, we are limited to a certain amount that we can take out of the lake every year. And if we conserve that water, then there's more available for more residents and more businesses and other development. Yes?
First of all, I want to thank Elevate for the work they've done here in the Village of Broadview. It looks like you've been very thorough, and this is all helpful data in Broadview. But how much does this cost the Village of Broadview for you to do this program here?
So repeating for the recording, the question was how much does it cost for the village to do this analysis? It was a pro bono analysis. So we are, Metropolitan Planning Council and Elevate are, we're funded by grants and philanthropic foundations to do this work. So there was no charge for the municipality.
Amen.
Sure. I know it's a lot of data and probably difficult to digest. We have our email addresses here, so if people have questions later, we're happy to answer those. All right. Thank you, Mayor.
Now, you can't tell me that you all don't have any questions as it relates to water rates, water affordability, or the analysis. So MPC and Elevate, that just shows you that Broadview do pay attention to what's going on. We're very, we communicate with the residents on where we're going and how we get there. And most certainly when we look at water rates and the increase, we'll do it like we did it before. We will have a community meeting to have this conversation. We'll schedule a meeting with our large water users. That's what we've done in the past to talk about it. When we did the discount for the large water users, as many of you know, I had just got elected and we needed to address this issue. And what leaders do is they make decisions. So I had to make a decision, and the decision that I decided to go in was do a 5-year plan, regardless of what the city of Chicago did, was to put a 5-year plan in place so that we can catch up. And now that we have some input on this analysis that we got free, a free service that can help us make better informed decisions as it relates to our large water users, because it is an impact on our infrastructure. And if they're using the most of the water, just like we have to pay a water bill, everybody has to pay a water bill, regardless of how much water you use, because we have to make sure that we can protect the infrastructure of the village. And when we have these large water main breaks, they're not breaks that cost us, sometimes we get water main breaks that cost us almost $100,000, literally, or $40,000. So if we can protect the infrastructure and not have the water main breaks to break so often during peak seasons, then that money can go to replacing a street on 11th Avenue when we're talking about large. So we try to make sense out of everything that we do when it comes to the finances and be transparent and have a dialogue with you all. We want you to come out to the meetings. We want you to ask your questions. We want to be held accountable, because at the end of the day, it's all about us in this together. I live here in the Village of Broadview. I use water, and sometimes I had a high water bill one time, $1,300. Because of water, I got a bathroom outside and the water line broke. I didn't know it. It was in the wintertime. But when spring came around, I had to pay this $1,300. And when we talk about those that's on payment plans and stuff, at one point I was one of those water users that was on the plan. I didn't have $1,300 to pay a water bill. So sometimes we have residents that need our assistance, and we work every day for those that's having challenges paying their water bills to put them on some type of plan or connect them to a resource that can assist. And so we'll have these conversations often, especially when we start talking about the water rates. And like you said, the hard to reach are those that live in apartments. They just run the water. They don't know how much water costs. But then, and I can only speak to this because I have a condo in town, that people just run the water and they have to pay the water bill. But guess who got to pay for it when it's time for assessments due? The owners of those units. So all of this is about educating and informing on how we use water and how we protect the infrastructure and how we can do due diligence and educate people on the use of water. So I thank you, MPC and Elevate, for coming out. I know it's been several conversations and getting data and stuff like that, but we're happy that we did this because now we can truly say we have a plan that we can focus on. It's not just a plan that we put on the shelf and not revisit, because we will be revisiting this plan when we do our first community meeting as it relates to water rates. Yes, Deacon. Wait, hold on one second. Let me get you a mic. Jason, can we get a mic? I'm not good like Jason where I can remember verbatim the question. Thank you, Mr. Clerk.
I'd like to thank you, Mayor, for having this for us to inform us. But if I'm not mistaken, I think I heard you said that these new meters will allow you to know if a problem exists on the property, such as the leakage. And if that's true, then if I found that I was leaking, could my meter be malfunctioning? Because my bill was up and I found out after I had, I continued to call and tell them that the bill was going up and down, it was fluctuating. And I found out that the water leaking was in my toilet tank. And so the water was steady running high some months, and then it was sealed. And, you know, if the unit itself detects the overusage of water, could the unit be malfunctioning? That's my question.
Okay, so that's a really good question. So the smart meter allows us to detect when something is wrong. So if you have high water usage because you have a faulty sink or a running toilet, it's going to tell us because it's spinning. And so we can call you and say something is going on in your home. So we recommend that you call a plumber or you troubleshoot. It's not going to tell you the toilet is leaking or the sink is running. We can just tell you that it's spiking because we can see the number spiking. It's your responsibility as a homeowner to detect and to correct that issue. If not, you're going to continue to get a high water bill that we can't control. So it's not the equipment, it's something that you have to repair in your own home to correct the issue. Now, say the next month go on and you have the exact same issue. You fix that issue and then it's another issue and we still seeing water spiking. Then we can kind of assume like, okay, well, maybe let's look into the water meter. So we'll have the water department come out and check the water meter to make sure that it's not faulty. If they detect that it's not faulty, they're not going to change the meter out. So when you have high usage in water because you have a leaky toilet or a running faucet or a drip in a shower downstairs or something like that, you have to do your due diligence as a homeowner to correct that, because we can't correct what's going on in your home. We can just make a recommendation. But if it's a meter issue, we will check it. The second month, let us correct the problem. If it continues to happen, we'll check the equipment. And if the equipment come back that nothing is wrong, then you're going to have to do due diligence. And I get it. It's expensive to call a plumber. I get it, like $150 an hour. So I try to troubleshoot a lot of myself, you know, like put the dye in the toilet to see if it's going to bleed through, you know, because that's a way of detection. Leak and sink, I unscrew the filtration to get whatever residue. I try to troubleshoot because I don't have a lot of money to pay plumbers either, and I don't expect residents to do that. And if you're on a payment plan, just think how much taxing that's going to be. You're already behind in payments, you're trying to catch up, and now you got another issue that's going to cost you more money. So we don't want to do that to our constituents. We want to be fair, and we want to treat everyone like it's our own. But at some point, as a homeowner, you have to participate in your own rescue when it comes to a cost, because we can't assume that cost. You have to as a resident and as a homeowner. When I welcome new residents to the Village of Broadview, I don't say congratulations. I say welcome to home ownership, because guess what? Something is going to happen. And I don't know what that something is, but I've had my share of repairs and costs. So yeah, I get it. I understand. I'm not wealthy where I could just write a check. You know, I have to plan for stuff. But if we do regular maintenance and stuff like that, just get on the schedule. You can kind of troubleshoot. But the water department, they do a really good job of evaluating the equipment to make sure it's not the equipment. So thank you. Any other questions? Well, you all are more than welcome to stay till 7:30. Our regular board meeting will be starting in about 15 minutes. I appreciate you all coming out and hearing what we have to say this evening as it relates to water rates and water affordability. It's not our intent to increase on anything, but we have to stay abreast so that we can take care of the things just in case a problem arises. So we have to plan for a rainy day so it's not taxing on any of us in the village. So thank you all, and just stay tuned when we start having those hard discussions as it relates to water rates, because we're going to have those discussions, but this time it's going to be a little bit intentional now that we have a solid foundation that we can reference back to on the outcome of what we got, and I'm very pleased with that, so thank you. Have a good night, everyone, and we'll come back in about 15 minutes. But I'll stay around if you guys have any questions.